We are ready.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. Look at that. I hereby call this October 25th meeting of the Council of the City of Lancaster to order. Thank you for being with us this evening. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We do them every meeting. Now is a fantastic time to put your phone on silent or vibrate or turn it off. If you look back here and back here, you will see two white cameras, just so you know your public comments are being recorded as you are being live streamed, just so you are aware. If when you do make public comment, please come to the podium right here. Please begin with your name and the 100 block of your residence, and then feel free to move on. Please keep your comment to 3 minutes and keep, do your level best to stay on task and to the point. Okay, and with all that, if you would join me as you are willing and able and rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Okay, Mr. Harris, if you would please call the roll of members.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Arroyo.
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Cleese.
Here.
Ms. Craig.
Here.
Ms. Diaz.
Here.
Ms. Walsh.
Here.
And President Smith-Wadow.
Here. Thank you. We go then to approval of the minutes for, the October 11th, 2022 meeting of council. I'll hear a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Council comments on the minutes. Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baker.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith-Wadow.
Aye. That brings us to proclamations, honors, awards, and resolutions of recognition. We have one such resolution this evening, just honoring the life of former City Mayor Charlie Smithkull. We are going to do that a little later just to make sure that everybody who wanted to be here for that could be. So we're going to pull that up from the agenda, but we're actually going to go first to our first public comment period, reserved for those persons who have contacted the city clerk prior to the meeting. Do we have any, Mr. Harris?
We do, Mr. President. We have Mr. Domensic.
Sean, please.
Hello, Sean Domensic, 400 block of Fremont, Catholic worker here in the city. I take it based on the approval of the minutes that everyone got to at least note my discussion of human rights at the last city council meeting. I know some weren't present. And that the legislative change in the code that I'm calling for, I've been arguing and explaining, is a human rights violation here in the city of Lancaster. I wanted to offer some context for that. There's a case, Robert Martin versus the city of Boise, 2017. He was a homeless plaintiff, and this was judged in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And it begins, I want to read just a few excerpts from that court statement. I want to note that this is actually the highest law in the land judging the constitutionality of punishing homeless people for being homeless when they're not able to get shelter. And they tried to appeal it to the Supreme Court, and they did not hear it. And so this stands as the law. We're not in the Ninth Circuit, but I trust that homeless people are still people, still have human rights outside of the Ninth Circuit. So a few quotes from that case. It begins with an interesting literary quote that says, quote, "The law in its majestic equality forbids rich and poor alike to sleep under bridges, to beg in the streets, and to steal their bread," unquote. They go on, quote, "We consider whether the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment bars a city from prosecuting people criminally for sleeping outside on public property when those people have no home or other shelter to go to. We conclude that it does." They go on to look at other precedents, as is usual, and I noted an interesting discussion. They said, "We are not alone in reaching this conclusion. As one court has observed, resisting the need to eat, sleep, or engage in other life-sustaining activities is impossible. Avoiding public places when engaging in this otherwise innocent conduct is also impossible. As long as the homeless plaintiffs do not have a single place where they can lawfully be, the challenged ordinances, as applied to them, effectively punish them for something which they may not be convicted under the Eighth Amendment: sleeping, eating, and other innocent conduct. That was from Pottinger versus City of Miami. Of course, winter is coming on. Everyone's talking about increasing emergency shelter capacity, an effort which I applaud. Nonetheless, this is an illegal ordinance. It is a human rights violation, and it is urgent to establish a right to rest here in Lancaster City. So I'm looking at the agenda and I see various laudable projects: amending fireworks ordinance, a eulogy to the mayor, authorizing a borrowing of $50 million for capital projects. I don't see anything addressing a right to rest. And none of those things, as important as they may be, seem as important as consistent human rights violations in the city of Lancaster. So again, I urge you to, at minimum, pass a resolution to begin looking into it. And as you ought, to change the code as soon as possible, to stop enforcement, and to consider the right to rest of our homeless here in Lancaster. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sean. All right, we go then to, just to be clear, I'm not seeing any members. They have not arrived yet, right?
They're not here.
Okay. Fantastic. We're going to go then to reports requested by council. So our fabulous team at CPED, if they would provide us with an update on the city comprehensive plan. Also, Mr. Harris, just for my verification, we don't have any interim reports of committees of council?
We do not.
Thank you. This is going to end up projected, counselors, so if you want to use your screens. Gentlemen, I'm so sorry. Mr. Harris, if you get a second, if you would turn the lights back, we're going to go ahead and hold. You can remain seated there, but thank you for your flexibility.
Thank you, Bernie.
Okay. All right. If you're not following along, we are going to move Council Resolution number 85, 2022, from Section D up to proclamations, honors, awards, and resolutions of recognition in the agenda. As it is the only one on the agenda, I've decided we're doing that heading of the agenda right now. As such, Council Resolution number 85, 2022. Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. President. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Lancaster in recognizing the recent passing from this life of Charles W. Smithgall, who served the city and fellow residents as mayor of the City of Lancaster, and honoring his contributions.
I'll hear a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Harris, if you would be so kind as to read the rest of the text.
I'd be happy to. Whereas Charles W. Charlie Smithgall passed from this life on October 18, 2022, in the 77th year of his life. And whereas Charlie Smithgall served as mayor of the city of Lancaster from 1998 until 2006. And whereas, during his tenure as mayor, Charlie Smithgall was a tireless advocate for the city of Lancaster and its residents. And whereas, during his tenure as mayor, Charlie Smithgall helped to reshape the skyline and economic fortunes of Lancaster with the addition of Clipper Magazine Stadium and the Keystone Opportunity Zone Industrial Park, and he developed and significantly advanced plans for the Lancaster County Convention Center. And whereas, Charlie Smithgall signed the ordinance creating the city's Heritage Conservation District, providing historic preservation review and protections for much of the city, and later oversaw efforts to have the city listed as the country's largest national registered district. And whereas, Charlie Smithgall also oversaw development of the city's infrastructure, including construction of Binns Park, a new city police station, and the $75 million retrofitting of the Conestoga and Susquehanna water treatment plants with microfiltration technology. And whereas, in his private life, Charlie Smithgall was a pharmacist and the owner and operator of Smithgall's Pharmacy, a neighborhood business opened by his father in 1916. And Charlie Smithgall was active in his neighborhood and community groups for 35 years provided his historic canons for the annual Independence Day concert in Longs Park. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Lancaster does hereby publicly recognize the invaluable contributions of Charlie Smithgall and express its appreciation for his efforts to ensure and shape the city in which we live.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, and thank you for preparing this resolution for us today. We have a motion and a second, and members of the mayor's family here present this evening, if any of you would like to take a moment to address council. Thank you, and you're very welcome. Council comments.
Well, people don't really know that at 10 years old, used to spend a lot of time walking over, talking to him. He used to always make me laugh. One of the things that was so genuine about him was his help when we were desperately hurting, when my brother had 3 operations because he had a cleft foot. And there were times that we couldn't afford the medication. And he always said, just give it to me when your mom has everything. So I can say one thing, that he had a big heart for the community, for the people in need. And I was so honored to have that experience since the age of 10. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comments? I will say, just as council president, you sit up here, and if you're lucky, you get to spend some time with Mr. Harris, and he'll tell you about the archives, and you really get to see the length of these things expand out over time, and decisions that we make that we, might argue with current, former, future mayors about, and you sort of get this perspective that the person who sits in the mayor's office has to think about what the city's going to do and be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, a generation from now. And that's a pretty awesome responsibility, even for the city of 60,000 people. So it's really our privilege. Comments from the public? Okay. Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Bakay.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz?
Aye.
Ms. Walsh?
Aye.
And President Smith-Wato?
Aye. Thank you. Counselor Diaz, if you would be so kind. If you would join me, just one more piece of circumstance in observing a moment of silence for the mayor. Thank you. Thank you for being here. You are more than welcome to stay for as much of this Michigas as you like, and you're also free to go. We're just happy that you were here to receive the resolution. All right. Gentlemen, please. You had a whole item. You were not an interruption in any way. Yep. Once they've stepped out, if you would grab the lights again, Mr. Harris.
Yes.
Again, thank you for your flexibility. Please proceed, gentlemen.
Absolutely. It's good to think about our history as we think about where we're headed to the comprehensive plan. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, members of the public. We are excited to present, very excited tonight to present an update on the comprehensive plan development process. It has been a little while since we've talked to you about this important project. We kicked off the public-facing part of this project in June 2021, and that was during the Mayor's Neighborhood Week that summer. And since that time, our project team has been on the tear. For the last 16 months, community engagement has been the driving force of this process for the comprehensive plan. The amount, the quality, and the types of engagement have been unprecedented for a project of this type. We have partnered with our best-in-class Department of Neighborhood Engagement all along the way, as well as our communications team, in order to interact with residents and stakeholders in a variety of creative and effective ways. Since it has been some time since we talked about the comprehensive plan, we wanted to give a reminder to the council and to members of the public what a comprehensive plan is and why it's important. We have a few key tenets here up on the screen. A comprehensive plan is a long-term planning document that guides the growth and development decisions of a community over the next 20 years. It is primarily focused on the physical growth and change, but it's connected to many of the other social, economic, and environmental aspects as well. In addition to that, it is steeped in and utilizes community engagement to identify key values and goals for the plan that should really underpin the work that we do. It also lays the foundation for city policy, including zoning code. Land use is one of the main premises of a comprehensive plan. In addition, capital improvement projects, investment decisions, partnerships, et cetera. I wanted to make a quick note about the foundation of the comp plan as a project and as a process before we move ahead. Before we kicked off the public engagement in June 2021, the department spent a good deal of time on the runway scoping the plan. So this meant that during that phase, we met with organizational partners, interviewed key stakeholders, and established the Comprehensive Plan Committee. That Comprehensive Plan Committee was also afforded its own professional facilitator with the idea that committee would serve as a rudder and a testing ground for plan ideas. Through this early work with the CPC, other partners, and then the subsequent community engagement, we established a set of core values that are central to the planning process. So you can see here on the slide, we've got 5 values that we highlight: equity and inclusion, transparency, collaboration, integrity, and quality. It is worth noting that these values show a commitment to achieve national best practice in meaningful community engagement and data-informed decision-making. Both of these goals, engagement and data, are key elements of the mayor's strategic plan. Douglas will now speak more about the Comprehensive Plan Committee. They have played a really essential role in this whole process, and he's going to give you a little more detail about how we have worked with them.
Thank you, Director Delfs, and good evening, everyone. From the inception of this project, our team has envisioned a committee of city residents and business owners who would guide the comprehensive planning process. Most of the typical engagements with residents that we have are fairly brief: 1 minute, 5 minutes, 1 hour, maybe several meetings. However, our team also saw value in creating a group that offered opportunities for deep and sustained engagement through a 2-year process. Putting this group together was really a collaboration between Lancaster Equity, Lancaster City Alliance, our Department of Neighborhood Engagement, and the members themselves. We've called this group the Comprehensive Plan Committee, or CPC. It has 19 members, and it represents a wide diversity of our city community. Their purpose has really been twofold, as Director Delfs mentioned. One is to advise the city's outreach process and products, and the second is really to serve as an ongoing in-depth focus group. The city recruited a facilitation firm, Connect the Dots, that specializes in outreach and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, to help lead the group, train them, and establish good operating norms. It's not enough just to recruit members, though. We knew that we needed to empower them and also lower barriers to participation. This group was provided trainings, paid opportunities, food deliveries to their homes on an as-need basis, and other assistance as well. They've met 22 times so far throughout the process, reviewed key documents and strategies, and have been a vital partner to the comprehensive plan. And on behalf of the Planning Bureau, I want to say thank you to all of them. We set out, let me back up here. One of the important roles that the CPC played was in picking the city's consulting team. That group interviewed 3 firms and ultimately recommended this team on the screen, which the city has been contracted with for about 18 months. Bergman is the project lead, and their sub-consultants are listed below. While the consulting firms offer important expertise and a fresh perspective, we have also valued the expertise in our local community. And city residents, of course, are at the top of that list. Our team has also worked closely alongside these nonprofits, businesses, and institutions listed on the screen. They have been partners in our grants, our outreach process, data collection, and also policy development to date. But implementing this bold vision, community-driven initiative, would not have been possible without the funders who believed in this vision. The comprehensive plan effort was in addition to our annual budget, it was in addition to our typical staffing responsibilities, and it required unique partnerships to implement. We are incredibly grateful for the generous funders that these listed on the screen that have supported our vision and helped finance this planning initiative. They have lightened the burden for taxpayers and ensured an inclusive and robust planning process. So thank you to all of them. Director Delfs will now help set the stage for what the broader engagement process looked like.
Okay. Well, I think think you've probably gathered by now that we've set out with the ambitious goal of giving any and all residents, any and all people an opportunity to contribute their voices and inputs to the comprehensive plan development process. This is what we mean by substantive and inclusive public engagement. We've got a few great pictures there from some of the work that we've done in the community. Moving along here, just wanted to note that there are several main components of the engagement plan itself. I'm not going to talk about each of these in depth, but want to note the bullets on the screen that we have implemented both virtually and in person in all quadrants of the city. Just to name some of these here, we've got project staff meetings, which often included interdepartmental dialogue with city staff. We've talked about the comprehensive plan committee meetings, key organizational leader meetings, advisory committee meetings. We have held, with the help of our consultant team, a number of meetings that are focused with topical or subject matter experts, which we've referred to as our advisory committees or advisory or technical advisory boards. We've done public workshops, pop-up community events, student engagement, online engagement, citizen-led meetings in a box, public art community engagement. So public art projects and process have actually been tied in and integrated with our comp plan process, which has been really innovative. A deliberative forum, also called a mini public, and local partnerships. Douglas is going to speak about a few of these in depth because we'd really like to showcase some of the incredible work that we've been able to do over the last year and a half. So thinking about all of these types of engagement that we've done over the past year and a half, wanted to give you a sense of what have been the results of these tireless engagement efforts. And here are a handful of stats that help tell the story up on the screen. Many city employees have staffed these events and have been instrumental in collecting resident input. When we set out at the beginning of the community engagement process, we had an ambitious goal of engaging with at least 4,000 residents, 4,000 individuals. At this point in the process, we've engaged over 4,700 people directly. That includes in-person, virtual meetings, and survey responses. As you can see up there, we've had more than 80 public events related to the comprehensive plan since June 2021. There have been 8 meeting in a box sessions, more than 50 key individual and organization interviews, 1,000 survey responses, more than 1,900 visitors to our project website, and then again, want to circle back to the importance of the 22 comprehensive plan committee meetings. We have one deliberative forum up there, which I think is really important to spend a little more time on, and Douglas is going to do that shortly. I think you're up next.
Thank you, Director Delfs. It is really exciting for me to see all of that on one slide. So that's a year and a half of effort there. So thank you. Needless to say, though, conducting a major engagement effort in a pandemic was very challenging. So I think that highlights even more so how remarkable some of these statistics are. And virtual engagement has been and is still an essential part of our outreach strategy. Our social media efforts have seen thousands of interactions, and we've collected about 600 online surveys as well through Engage Lancaster to date. In fact, our comprehensive plan committee actually met virtually for all but a few meetings over the last 2 years. So kudos to them and the long Zoom meetings they had to endure. On this slide, there are also a couple of resident highlights. Our Vista buddy Calhoun has been out on the streets and meeting people and business owners and getting pictures and asking them about their thoughts on the city and what they love about the city and what needs to be improved. Maybe some of you have seen these on social media already. They've garnered a lot of attention. Language access has also been another essential component of our outreach. To ensure our process included our full community, we prioritize language access services. All surveys and community boards were translated into Spanish. Bilingual staff and interpreters were provided at events. We held Spanish-speaking events throughout the process. We also included a non-English speaking resident in the comprehensive plan committee. We translated the brochure into 4 different languages. This is actually just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we did on a daily basis around language access. And I do want to extend a special thanks to Director Milsey Carrasco, Zaira Feilu, and Denise Lazo, and Emma Hum, and others who assisted in this important effort. It was definitely a team effort. And I think now we'd like to mention a few of the unique examples of our engagement process. While we don't have time to go through all of them, I picked out 4 that I think really highlight some of the unique efforts that we have. Example 1 is the deliberative forum, otherwise known as the mini public, that Director Delfs mentioned. This is a very unique effort that we took on, and this was in partnership with Dr. Medvik and Burwood Yost from Franklin and Marshall College's Floyd Institute of Public Policy. They approached us with this opportunity for a deliberative forum. And I'll walk you through kind of what the ingredients of that are. First is to select a representative sample of city residents. Second, we provided those residents with information about Lancaster City and urban planning best practices. And then 3, we convened them in person in this picture. You see a snapshot of that. And we facilitated thoughtful dialogue on redevelopment areas with these groups and recorded that information. Some people, drew on maps. We had a note taker at each table. We also had someone who was dedicated to facilitating this. And the idea is that this is sort of the standard for informed democracy. We give people the information that they need in order to make the decisions on behalf of our community. So we're very proud of this effort. We had 30 residents that attended, and their feedback will be essential in drafting recommended land use policies for you to consider at a later date. Example 2, Spanish-speaking climate call. So climate change and land use are closely linked. We know that the way that we use our land can increase climate change, and we also know that increases in climate change also change our land. So the city comprehensive plan must be bold in addressing climate change, and for that we need locally tailored solutions. The City of Lancaster contracted with Regen All, who is a local nonprofit that specializes in climate solutions, and served as our consultant for 4 climate listening sessions with city residents. One of these meetings was held exclusively in Spanish and coordinated in partnership with CASA, who is an immigrants advocacy organization in the city. And that was actually our best attended session out of those 4. Example 3, meetings in a box. So a best practice in community engagement is compensating residents for their expertise and efforts. And we've tried to do this where we can. This is one of the ways we were able to compensate residents for their work. We offered a meeting in a box, which is a step-by-step guide to hosting discussions about the comprehensive plan in your home or location of choice. And the lead resident received a cash stipend and guidance from staff. They could use that money either to compensate their time or to provide beverages and food for the people that they convene or share it. So we tried to provide flexibility in that. And then the information that was collected could be submitted on paper or digitally to city staff. And we had all items translated in both English and Spanish, hard copy and digital. And we had 7 or 8 of these. I forget what the slide said earlier. Oh, 8, thank you. We had 8 of those. Our 4th and final specific example is the Public Art Community Engagement Program, otherwise known as PACE. This is a partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts, and the city selected 5 local artists who were hired to create community-driven public art projects with their communities, and these were all city resident artists as well. Together, they engaged over 800 residents. They mapped community assets and helped to add an artistic vision for our future city. I know that was all a lot of information about the process, so it's probably hard to believe that that is only indeed the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot to celebrate, I think, in our engagement process, but I'd like to pass it back to Chris to talk about deliverables and what lies next in the process.
Okay, thank you, Douglas. I believe when I've talked about this project in the past, you may have heard me describe this, the comp plan, as a mega project. There really are several components of the project. As you've seen, it's complex to make sure that all of these are advancing simultaneously. Many of them do relate to one another. I'd like to highlight a handful of the key deliverables that are coming out of the comprehensive plan process. As you can see here, we've noted the engagement report and existing conditions report titled Lancaster Today, community development objectives, future land use map, narrative policies, the official map for the city, and ultimately, we may have other focus area maps too that could focus on areas such as economic development corridors, the riverfront, et cetera. I think it's important to note here that we've actually completed those first three items on the list, the engagement report. We will have a second phase or final version of the engagement report later in the process. Much of what is in that report came from really the first half, the data and other information from the first half of our engagement. The existing conditions report and the engagement report are both on the project website for viewing for city council or members of the public. And then the community development objectives, I'll speak about a little bit more just in a moment. As part of the comprehensive plan, the state municipal planning code requires that the city establish a set of overarching community objectives. Based on the priorities that we have learned directly through the community engagement over that 16-month process, we have created those objective statements and published them in draft form as part of our engagement report. For your reference, we have provided a summary handout articulating those objectives by topic area. You can see on the screen that we've taken the approach of having really a set of traditional topics or elements in order to articulate our community objectives that's required by the MPC. I guess the next natural question is, what do we do with all this information? We have a ton of community engagement input and feedback that we've received from a variety of stakeholders. We're processing that information that we've gotten. In addition, we've also done a number of technical analyses as well with our consultant team. Much of that went into the existing conditions Lancaster Today report. One of our big questions now is how are we going to organize that information going ahead in the comprehensive plan document itself? And after we completed our phases of broad engagement, we're going to be focusing on plan production over the next several months. And this means that the project will work to formulate policies in the form of both text and maps, and using all that community input and technical analysis that we've done. As you can see on this screen, we're planning to organize the resulting policy content in planning systems. I don't know if these terms are going to be exactly as shown here. We're still workshopping some of the language, but this is the direction that we're headed at the moment. Last but not least, it's been a long journey since June 2021, and actually even before that, because there was a lot of the pre-work that was done that I mentioned. Wanted to show you a look at the big picture timeline in terms of where we've been and where we're going from here. From summer 2021 to winter 2022, as I said, we've worked to establish our main guiding values and priorities with the community. We then sharpened our public input to determine the city's key assets, opportunities, and challenges. That was during the winter 2022 to fall 2022 time period. And now we're at a significant pivot point in the project. Over the next 4 to 5 months, we'll hunker down and we're going to create the draft plan, including the future land use map. Once we have a draft plan, we'll be sharing that document with the public and the city's planning commission. We expect the refinement process to take a few rounds with the City Planning Commission, and our target is to bring the plan back to City Council for review and adoption in summer of next year, 2023. So that is the anticipated timeline at this point. I know we've thrown a lot of information at you. That's the end of the formal presentation. If you have any questions about what we presented today, or even maybe some parts of the story that weren't in the presentation, happy to answer those questions as best we can. And if we don't have an answer tonight, happy to do some research and get back to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just real quick, do we have these slides?
We do.
Okay, excellent.
We'll distribute those to council.
Okay, good. Just to make sure we have them. Members of council, questions for Mr. Delson, Mr. Smith? Comments, priorities?
I just like to make one comment, if I may, Council President. This is our third comprehensive plan. I mean, I know that I'm aware of the two most recent, which is going back in the 90s and then the 40s.
There's one in 29, one in 48 roughly, and then there was one in 93.
Okay.
And then there was a regional comprehensive plan adopted around 2006.
So this is the first time that this planning process has been implemented from the ground up. In previous iterations of planning processes that have happened from the city, it has not started with our neighbors. It has started with, professionals in a particular setting that were setting comprehensive planning policies for 20-plus years without this level of engagement. And I have to just say, I'm very proud of this work and the work of our multiple departments, but in particular, community planning and economic development. And that one slide that you shared with the amount of engagement that has happened and the engagement report that has been shared with council should be a source of tremendous pride for us as a community and how we are going about doing comprehensive planning. This is something that other communities are doing, but that it is few and far between that have taken it to the lengths that we have and really seized this opportunity to do comprehensive planning in this way. Thank you.
I do have a quick question. Two things. You mentioned the website. Can you explicitly tell folks where they can go to find it, the documents that are there so far? And then also, what are the next opportunities for more engagement? When might they happen in the rest of this process? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, the website, thank you, Counselor. The website is ourfuturelancaster.com. And you can read some blog posts. The documents that we've published to date are posted there as well, and there's contact information, et cetera. Ourfuturelancaster.com.
Is that site, is that platform also available in Spanish?
It is. You can toggle between English and Spanish on there.
Excellent.
I'll take a shot at the second part. I think it is important to note that we're at the point now in the process where we're going to be very forthright about communicating the information that we're kind of going dark for a little while, in the sense that we're going to be spending time on the plan production. And the first major two phases of the project in terms of the broad engagement and collecting input are now complete. However, our game plan for the spring of next year is, once we have a draft plan, both the narrative policies and text and the maps, we've been discussing with the project team that we're likely to have a public open house to share the draft plan. I'm sure that we're going to get input and feedback about that draft plan at that point. What we have been talking about is combining that input that we get with the planning commission process, because we're really at the point now where we're going to have to move into the formal part of the process. We're getting more specific and technical questions that we'll need to resolve with the planning commission.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from members of council? I'll just say I had the privilege of briefly attending the deliberative forum that was held at Franklin and Marshall. It was a really great opportunity. Just being frank, one of the more diverse rooms that I've seen in terms of community meetings, public planning process meetings, and it seemed like a lot of really excellent feedback was able to be pulled out. So I don't necessarily envy you gentlemen or the CPIT team the amount of work that you're about to dive into, but we're very grateful for it, so thank you. Oh, yes. Hi, Tim.
Tim Stuhlder, One United Lancaster. Talked a lot about the process. As you begin to go dark, I'm just wondering, are there any themes, what were the major themes that you encountered in all of this public engagement and data gathering? And in particular, for those of us who follow city issues pretty closely and know that affordable housing is an issue, environmental resilience is an issue, are there any themes or areas to explore that might surprise us?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. Some of these may not be totally surprising to you, but certainly affordable and quality housing was at the top of the list of topics that we heard from residents. And in particular, I think they wanted to see more of it, certainly, and thought that investments in existing housing, but also incentives for new development would be one way of getting there. So there are a lot of ways that the city can explore that, and I imagine that's part of what we'll be diving into over the next couple of months. And another one that has emerged repeatedly is the safety and also just general experience of our streets. So certainly our Vision Zero plan has done a great job of promoting safety for pedestrians and cyclists and all users really of streets and eliminating fatalities and serious injuries. But other things have emerged too in terms of just a street experience, making sure that it is a pleasant and engaging walk, that things like noise are not overbearing or sort of destroying the well-being of our community as well. So I imagine that there will be some recommendations or policies in terms of how to address that and further bolster our efforts around continuing to make our streets a really great place in the city. Anything else you'd like to add to that?
Tim, I had a feeling you were going to ask that question. It's a really important question. We are still sorting through all the information, but I think it is worth noting that when we think about the structure or the organization of the information, the community objective topics that I put back on the screen, that's where we're thinking about what types of policies we're writing at a citywide level. Douglas mentioned a few of the highlights in that regard. We've also gotten a fair amount of commentary regarding specific geographic areas and where there may be change in the city. I'm not sure any of those would be a surprise necessarily. Maybe one that's taken on more momentum is both that bubbled up from the grassroots level, but also a lot of the key organizational stakeholders have been very interested in the vision for the riverfront and the extension, the river throughout the city boundaries, and then those connections into neighboring jurisdictions. I think we're going to be doing some interesting work thinking and hopefully policy writing around the riverfront. Some of the other areas, I don't think you'd be surprised. The train station area, for example, some of the areas that we anticipate definitely will change, such as the current prison site, et cetera. So we've had, that was actually, when we did the deliberative forum mini public, we picked 6 areas in the city that we expect to be confronting some kind of change in the future. And that's where we had those groups really over a day-long period engage on, wow, how are we going to deal with what might look very different in these 5 or 6 areas of the city? Well, yes, although I do think we largely have the game plan for that particular site. What were the other ones from the?
Sure. One example would be the currently grass area where the Armstrong facility used to be, mostly owned by F&M now, partly owned by LGH. There's undeveloped land there. Another area of that we focused on in the deliberative forum was the area basically between Fruitville and Manheim Pikes, and looking at land uses there, mostly commercial, industrial now, and imagining what that should be going forward.
And I think another important one to mention, thinking about the southeast and southwest quadrants, a lot of those, a lot of the land in those quadrants are residential and likely to remain residential, but there are a few important nodes. And so Ingleside is a very important one, for example. There might be 1 or 2 others that we're looking at as well.
President Wendell, I had a question that just kind of popped up. Related to the housing, when you had the group of people from the community, I would say like the Latinos that you mentioned, there was a Spanish one that was put together. Can you tell me what exactly they made a mention that was really important to them that kind of resonated or kind of brought, a flag up?
Specifically from the Latino population in the city?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we heard much different in the way of housing needs. In my experience, it's really been driven by these 2 interrelated questions of housing quality, recognizing that we have old housing stock in the city, and do we have the programs available to help support the rehab and the maintenance of our current housing stock. Also, the interrelated issue, of course, is affordability. But I think that has been driven more by income level than race or ethnicity. And even beyond income level, it's been a pretty universal response on those particular housing issues. Douglas, do you know was there anything else specific from the engagement?
Not that I can think of. We didn't necessarily disaggregate certain questions by race and ethnicity. We certainly wanted to make sure that we were tracking demographics and meeting, the city, a sample that was representative of our city. But I don't know that we had anything broken down in that way. I think I would agree with Chris in terms of there being a lot of universal issues and probably many that tracked, closely, I think, with income issues.
So the majority was because of income issues and also the cost of living. Is that correct?
That's correct. And Councilor Diaz, also I would add, maybe we didn't hear this so much in the comprehensive plan engagement because that the housing market stuff gets to be pretty technical, but I do know that when we did our housing analysis and then when we created the interim housing strategy, we did try to look at potential trends with race and ethnicity. And I think one of the questions that we saw come up again and again was related to single head of household, primarily for women, single head of household, and then also just some analysis from our team related to an interest in, what happens with differences in family size. Like if you have a larger family size, what is the flexibility for the types of housing units that might be available? So I think that those issues may relate more to the Latino population. That was more related to our housing analysis versus our engagement with comp plan. But I think it's very relevant, and that's the other piece of the puzzle. We're trying to gather all the public input and put it into our policymaking, but we also have the technical analysis that's been done about the housing market as well.
Thank you.
Sir, would you? Thank you.
Phil Jones, I live on the 100 block of South Marshall. I agree with the mayor that the engagement process that you guys engaged in was impressive indeed. Two components of that engagement process were forgive me if I don't get the nomenclature right, the mini public hearings and the meetings in a box, right? What was the selection criteria by which you brought people into those meetings, members?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Thank you. So I'll start with the meeting in a box. That's a little bit more straightforward, and then I'll explain the mini public. So with the meetings in a box, this was an opportunity that we primarily offered to both the comprehensive plan committee of the residents that we are working with as a steering committee, and also the planning commission. It was certainly not limited to only them, but those were really the two groups in which we advertised this opportunity. Both of those groups had received some training in planning issues, what zoning is, what land development is. The Planning Commission reviews plans regularly and sets policy, and the CPC received an abundance of training through their time too. So we really wanted someone leading these meetings that was both a city resident and neighborhood person, but also had some experience with the matters. So that was a meeting in a box. The deliberative forum, this is a really fascinating thing that happened. So Franklin and Marshall researchers mass mailed about 700 residents randomly across all census tracts. And they basically said, you're invited to show up on this date, and you're going to be paid this sum of money in exchange for your time. Please register here. And the registration took them to a demographic survey that they filled out. And all of those responses got funneled back to Franklin and Marshall, and then they blindly sampled those respondents who are willing to participate and selected them based on them being a representative sample of the census tract that they lived in. In other words, when we selected someone from the Northeast or the Southwest, we were trying our best to pull several residents from that area that met the demographics of race, ethnicity, educational attainment, and gender. And then we also selected the numbers of people based on population across those census tracts. So it gets quite complex, but it was intended to be a statistically significant sample of the city, or a representative sample. So that's how that was done. It was blindly done by Franklin and Marshall College's researchers, and then that list was recruited to show up. So we had about, I think it was 28 or 29 residents in the end who attended. Sure.
Any other questions from the public on the comprehensive plan presentation? Going once, going twice? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mr. Harris, can we have yep, there we go. Okay, that brings us to our legislative agenda. We begin with heading A, legislative budget transfers. Is this to you, Mr. Harris, or do we go directly to Councilor Baquet?
We go directly to Councilor Baquet with this.
Councilor.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, as you are aware, the city is self-insured for workers' compensation costs. Every year, funds to pay workers' compensation claims are included in the individual department budgets, but those claims are paid from the administrative services budget. So each quarter, we shift money from the departments where those injured workers have made claims to the administrative services budget to cover the costs. For the third quarter of the year, workers' comp claims were made by city firefighters and public works staff members. A total of $34,352.15 is being moved from those department budgets into administrative services. Because this money is being moved between departments, this requires city council approval. So I make a motion to approve the third quarter workers' compensation transfers totaling $34,352.15 as proposed.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Council comments on the budget transfer.
Only to make a quick note that these were provided to council, so they have the itemized list of the transfers.
And council members, you have those? Oh, script, good. Yeah, council comments. From the public. Okay, hearing none? Oh, sorry. Councilor Baker, did I?
No, you're good.
Okay, please proceed, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baquet.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Gregg.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith Waddell.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Baker. All right, that brings us to items concerning the Heritage Conservation District. Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. President. Considering the following application and recommendation from the Historical Commission for improvements to a property in the Heritage Conservation District, we have one this evening. Inline Properties LP, owner of 22 South Duke Street, proposes construction of a new third-story frame addition to a two-story rear brick wing on a commercial building. And that was recommended for approval by the Historical Commission.
I'll hear a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. This was recommended for approval, but nobody's here to present or argue their case. That's fine. Council comments. From the public? Okay. Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baquet.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Gregg.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
President Smith Waddell.
Aye, thank you. That brings us to ordinances for final passage. We begin with Administration Bill Number 2022. Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. President. Excuse me. An ordinance authorizing the incurrence of non-electoral debt of the City of Lancaster, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, by the issuance of up to $53,500,000 in principal amount of general obligation bond, series of 2022 bonds, issued for the purpose of providing funds for the 2022 project, which consists of 1A, improvements and upgrades to the city's water treatment and distribution facilities, B, improvements and upgrades to the city's parks and related facilities, C, improvements to streets and traffic signals within the city and related facilities, and D, improvements to stormwater facilities within the city. Each is set forth on Exhibit A, hereto. And 2, other capital projects set forth on Exhibit A, hereto. 3, other miscellaneous capital projects which may, by resolution of the City Council or in lieu of resolution by enactment of an ordinance of the city in connection with its capital budget, hereafter be approved. 4, paying capitalized interest on the 2022 bonds. And 5, paying issuance costs in connections with the 2022 bonds. Determining to sell the 2022 bonds at a private sale by negotiation or invitation. Approving the form of the 2022 bonds. Authorizing the purchase of bond issuance for the 2022 bonds. Making a covenant for the payment of the debt service on the 2022 bonds, pledging the full faith, credit, and taxing power of this city, in support of such bonds, providing for the filing of required documents, providing for the appointment of a sinking fund depository for the 2022 bonds, approving the filing of engineering reports with respect to the self-liquidating debt, and authorizing execution, sale, and delivery thereof, and other necessary action.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Councilor Baquet.
Thank you. Mr. President, Bond Counsel has provided each of us with a black line version of the ordinance and authorizing and directing the issuance of the City of Lancaster General Obligation Bond Series of 2022 in an original principal amount of $51,780,000, known as the 2022 bonds. Such ordinance was introduced as Administrative Bill Number 20, 2022 before this council on September 27th, 2022. I hereby move to amend the ordinance labeled Administrative Bill Number 20, 2022 to include the additions, deletions, and other changes referenced on such black line version of the ordinance, which will be revised with the minutes of this meeting and which can be summarized as follows. In the caption of the ordinance, inserting Administrative Ordinance Number 20, 2022, and the enactment by City Council as October 25th, 2022. In the caption of the ordinance, inserting Administrative Bill Number 20, 2022. In the caption of the ordinance, the second whereas clause and the fourth whereas clause, inserting the amount, $51,780,000, as the amount of the 2022 bonds. Inserting into the fifth whereas clause the name of Citigroup Global Markets, Inc., as the purchaser of the 2022 bonds, and the date of October 25th, 2022 as the date of purchaser's proposal for the purchase of the 2022 bonds. In Section 1, inserting the amount of $51,780,000 as the amount of the indebtedness of the 2022 bonds. In Section 3, inserting the amount of $51,780,000 as the amount of the 2022 bonds. In Section 11, inserting the dates November 1st, 2033, and November 1st, 2032, as applicable to the 2022 bonds subject to redemption prior to maturity. In Section 11, inserting the dates and amounts of the term bonds. In Section 24 of the ordinance, inserting the date October 19th, 2022, amending the preliminary official statement dated October 14th, 2022, as the date of the preliminary official statement. On Exhibit B, inserting $51,780,000 as the size of the issue, including October 25th, 2022 as the date of enactment of the ordinance by the city, inserting November 1st, 2033 and November 1st of 2032 as applicable to the 2022 bonds subject to redemption prior to maturity, and adding the statement of insurance language of Build America Mutual Assurance Company, BAM, into the form of the bond, and on Exhibit C, attaching the amortization schedule for the 2022 bonds, on Exhibit D, adding the purchase proposal as to the 2022 bonds. My
Is that
motion.
all?
That is all, my motion.
Thank you. Oh, we have a motion and a second. Is it in the amendment, or once we get back to the full motion that you'd like to do your little thing? Not to call it a little thing, but,
We might as well speak on the amendment because it's material to the numbers that you're going to show us.
okay, fantastic, please.
Okay. And just so everybody's aware, that literally is the shortest that motion can be.
It's double spaced and it's only a page and a half, so I was
All
really
of-
impressed.
Looks
Mr.
like
McCarty, our bond counsel, as he and his office prepare that after we have the bond auction. So I want to talk just a little bit about the bond auction that occurred this morning, and then turn it over to Daryl so he can give you a refresh, basically, of the summary information that we presented to you September 27th, and talk about how the results of the bond auction ended up changing those numbers actually just a very little bit, which is good news. Before I do that, I want to circle back actually just to the previous meeting that we had with the audit presentation, and because other council members are here now, just to note that to do a bond issue, we need to have a bond rating. To have a bond rating, we want to have the most recent credit opinion. To get the most recent credit opinion, Moody's won't do that unless we have a completed audit and the audited financial statements to provide to them. So just wanted to circle back to that earlier conversation. This is pretty dry stuff. The 200 and whatever it is, 80 pages of the audit is pretty dry stuff, extraordinarily dry stuff, actually. But it's also just hugely important, not just to the, federal grant programs that we talked about at the earlier meeting, but to actions like this. So I just wanted to echo the mayor's comments to, thanking Vaughn and her team for, getting through another successful audit process. Literally, we had a conversation with Jen Kruger-Kebe before the earlier meeting. We've just completed this audit, and now we're already talking about the scheduling for the next engagement of Mayor Dussel for the 2022 audit, which causes us a little bit of pain, but it is what it is. So with all of that said, let me hopefully show this screen. And I'll preface this by just saying that we all get excited about different stuff, right? Director Delfs and Mr. Smith were up here talking about the wonderful engagement process and everything with community planning. Vaughn and I sat in my office for 22 minutes waiting for a bond auction to get completed. So we all have our things. So the bond auction this morning, we had a total of 7 bidders. You see that here. The good news, one, that we had 7 bidders, and they're sort of biggies: Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, Citigroup, and a number of others that you may or may not have heard of. But they're, big players in the municipal bond market were participating in the auction. The really best news is that we had, as we have in really each time we've done these bond auctions, we've had a lot of bidding activity, and that's what we want to see. Because ultimately what this is a competition to the lowest possible interest rate that we can get in bonds that we issue or sell on a given day. So the process for the bond auction, as I've described before, is really it's literally scheduled for 15 minutes. It was 11 a.m. that it was scheduled for. Vaughn and I twiddled our thumbs for almost 12 minutes because there were 0 bids for the first 11 minutes and 57 seconds of the auction. So the opening bid was just over 5%. I asked Daryl, and he hemmed and hawed on this answer a little bit, but I said, so what's the number that we should be looking for when this is all said and done? And he said, look for a 4. So it took a little while, but you see the opening bid here at 5.06% from KeyBank. Ended up being the highest bid, and I think that they made a couple of other bids, this firm. But then we got down to the end, and it was really like a fight between Citigroup and KeyBank, and they kept on sort of. If you look at these rates here, we're going out to 6 decimal places, and they're, noodling down like a couple thousandths of a percentage point to get down to the final result, which ended up that KeyBank put in a bid of 4.91%, and then about a minute later, Citigroup came in at 4.900. So ultimately, a good result. If we had been sitting here a year ago and I said that getting a 4.9% interest rate was a good result out of a bond auction, I would have been lying to you. But now in the current market, many, many, many things have changed. In the market that we're in, this is a really good result. We got it out of the competition and in the auction itself. So with that, I want to just see if there are any questions on the auction process. You all won't geek out on this as much as I clearly do, but if you have any questions, let me know. If not, we'll jump on to Daryl's presentation.
Real quick, so are the other participants, obviously, they see the bids in real time, right?
They know if they are the lowest bidder, and that is it. So they don't know where, this is probably the best example, right? So the first bid came in at 5.06%. 3 minutes later, somebody bid 5.28%.
Yeah, this was my question.
So they are blindly bidding. This is what, their bid is, but they don't know that they are 20 basis points higher than the first bid that came in.
Okay.
If they are the low bidder, then they know that at that point. But nobody, they know that the auction doesn't end. So I guess that's the other thing to explain here is that the auction is scheduled for 15 minutes. In the last 2 minutes, if there is a lead change, if another bidder ends up being the lowest bidder, the auction gets extended so that there's 2 minutes remaining.
Right.
And so that's why this ended up going until 11:20. So there were I think it was 8 extensions to the auction because Citibank and KeyBank kept on beating each other just by a very little bit.
Okay, and then you've done this for us a number of times, but tell me why I care about a difference in the fourth decimal place.
Difference in what?
In the fourth
In the-
decimal place.
So,
Like, what's the material difference between 4.9155?
I know that I don't know that interest cost. Daryl might know that interest cost.
You might not care to the fourth or sixth decimal point. That just shows how kind of tightly they
Yeah.
bid. But I think to answer your question in perspective, 0.01%, 1 basis point, if some people may know the terminology, that is worth about $85,000 to the city. So later when we look at some of these numbers, I'll show you how the difference between bid number 1 and bid number 2 or bid number 3 equates to X or XXX dollars for the city. So hopefully that was responsive.
Great, yeah, that's what I was looking for. I'm good, Counselor.
Okay, let me switch over to Daryl's presentation and go to this first page, which sort of goes to the point that we just talked about.
Sure. Oh, thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the opportunity to work with the city, continue to work with the city. Just let me take a couple steps back and I'll jump right back into the auction. We were before the Finance Committee in early September, actually looking before then, I think we started putting this ball in motion back in probably March or so. And then moving towards the Finance Committee meeting, working on structuring this financing to meet all the goals and objectives of the city. You know, this isn't me deciding this is how we're going to do it. This is me coordinating with Patrick to, again, meet the goals and objectives of the city. So we also, we talked about the auction. We put together what's called the preliminary official statement. I believe that we provided this to Mr. Harris, and he probably provided it to you. Some dry stuff in here, but there's also some very good economic demographic information about the city. So when you have a couple of spare moments, peek through it, and you will get some interesting information. And obviously, if you see anything in there that you have questions about, get to Mr. Harris, and he'll get to us. But don't be sleepy when you're looking at some of the text. Getting back to the auction then that happened today, this is a summary of all those bids that Patrick started talking about. Of the 7 bidders, Citigroup was the lowest bid at 4.90%. They actually bid 16 times, and they actually improved their bid or their proposal 0.16%. KeyBank was very tight there at 4.91%. So again, getting back to the president's question, the difference between first and second place there was worth probably about $120,000. I won't start talking extremes about 5.25%, but even I do want to touch on even the first 3 proposals, 4.9 to almost 4.96%. Doing the math there, the difference between first and third place even is about $500,000. So why you go through this process, why you know you're getting the best proposal out there, the best interest rate for the city, lowest debt service impact. Of those 7 firms, we got 28 bids throughout the session. Even when we talk about 7 bidders or 7 firms who bid on your bonds, the lower part of that talks about some of the bidders who work with other firms. So not only are you getting 7 firms actually working towards getting you the lowest interest rate, if you add up some of those other firms who work in so-called syndicates or groups, there's actually about 34 firms who were really involved this morning to bid and get your bonds. How do they bid to get your bonds? By bidding a lower interest rate. So that's the summary to tag on of what Patrick started with about the auction that happened today. On page 2, this should look familiar. You saw it, this type of presentation in both the Finance Committee in early September and the first reading in late September. Again, this is almost like three borrowings in one. We absolutely tailor a general fund component, a stormwater component, and a water component. Ultimately, the market knows one series, but you have to kind of delve into it so that Patrick and Vaughn and everybody know kind of how you're going to pay these bonds back out of the respective funds. So the general fund projects total about $15.4 million. Stormwater projects being funded total about $9.7 million, and the water fund projects being funded total about $23.9 million for the total of $49 million. I'm going to go down, start working downward now. I'll talk about the general fund first. So again, you always want to know where you're starting, because you got to know where you sit this morning before you can start kind of layering over or structuring the new borrowing. So your existing general fund debt service is about $4.6 million. You were actually already going to increase about $2 million as a result of the refinancing that took place last year. And then the impact on line 5 there of this borrowing to provide the $15.4 million is about $820,000 of budgetary impact. So the total impact going into 2024 will be about $2.8 million. All of these numbers, as Patrick already indicated, are substantially the same as what you saw at first reading. So nothing new here. I just wanted to recap it again. But again, everything that you kind of signed on, if you will, or were aware of at first reading came to fruition today. So nothing new. Then in the stormwater fund, on line 5 there, the budgetary impact or increase of this borrowing is about $713,000. That'll commence in 2024. In the water fund, the additional impact, there's actually going to be 2 steps here. It's going to be almost $1.3 million of budgetary impact or increase in 2025, and then another $600,000 of impact in 2026 for a grand total of about $1,850,000. Again, that's all tailored and intentional to have those impacts happen where they do. Most importantly, in the water fund, we need that impact to happen around the time that you're able to go back to PUC. So
Yeah, and I just want to touch on one change from the presentation that you saw back in September is we had originally presented having the 2 years of no impact in the water fund and then having the full impact come in 2025. The more Darrell and I talked about it, and frankly, the more memory that I have about the wonderful public utility rate-making process, because the opportunity was there, we thought it was better to have basically a 2-step process. So in our last public utility rate case for water rates, that was adopted with what's called a stay-out provision. So we cannot file a new rate case until until January of 2024. The rate-making process is at least a 9-month process. In theory, if we can file a rate case in January of 2024, we would have new rates in effect before the end of 2024, and so a full year of revenue in 2025. That's in theory. We've learned over the last couple of years that theories are great until reality, runs into you. So what we thought here is that it'd be better to take a 2-step process. So we have a somewhat smaller impact beginning in 2025, the $1,285,000 that you see there, and then an additional impact in 2026. And that really should ensure that for the water fund itself, we would have more than a full year of new rate impact from the public utility rate case to make sure that there are revenues there more than sufficient to cover the debt service, especially as we get into 2026. From that point forward, then you'll see this in the graphs that Darrell prepared, then we're basically at level debt service going out.
So those are the short-term impacts of this financing. The next couple of pages, again, consistent with what you saw before, are, again, I think some people like pictures better than numbers. In the general fund, and this gets back to the concept of each component is tailored to what you have today and what you're going to have kind of post-issuance. So in the general fund, you're starting at in 2022 at just over $4.5 million. You see the initial increase you're always going to have of about $2 million in 2023, the additional about $820,000 beginning in 2024 to 7.5 million total. You're going to stay there for about 6 years. Then in 2030, you're going to drop in your annual debt service by about 1.2 million. And then again, in 2035, you're going to drop by another 1.9 million. So that's really just kind of setting the table of having budgetary capacity going forward, to the extent you need to do additional financings over those periods of time. And this total term of this one is 20 years. It ends in 2042 for this borrowing. In the Stormwater Fund, a little more clear cut, but the same presentation here. Your existing debt service of about 1.1 million will stay the same in 2023. We'll increase the about 715,000 that you saw from the summary, end up at a total Stormwater Fund debt service of about $1,830,000. This financing is 25 years. Again, these projects are certainly longer life projects, so certainly appropriate, just like you think of your home mortgage, to finance these projects over a longer period of time, kind of spread it out, equitable. And lastly, the Water Fund. We touched on how there's going to be no impact from 2022 to 23 and 24, basically because of the PUC structure that Patrick talked about. You have your first impact in 2025, and then the secondary impact in 2026 to settle in debt service at about 14.4 million. This financing, like stormwater, is over a term of 25 years. Again, much longer useful life projects over an appropriate period of time. So those are really the pages that you have clearly seen before in the summary numbers and all the graphical presentations of before and afters. I'm more than happy to go through the rest of these pages, but they're all the numbers behind these graphs. Certainly entertain any questions that you have in terms of process, and we'll move forward to a closing.
I will say thank you. I know this is a tremendous amount of work, and it all happened today. This part of it
Yes.
all had to happen today to bring this to us.
It's sort of like the prep for a paint job, takes a long time, and
Yeah.
then the painting is just,
Quick.
get out the roller.
Yeah.
Today was the roller.
Exactly. Being prepared is very important. So I want to say thank you for all the work leading up to this point, and also today and bringing this to us. And you're absolutely correct. If we looked at this rate a year ago and that series of bids, it would have been unbelievable, but today it is where we are. So I appreciate you putting this all together and putting that in perspective for us as well. And that's really all I have on this, Council President.
Excellent. Council comments on the motion to amend. Comments from the public on the motion to amend, which, if you're wondering if they're about the presentation you just heard, they go here. Okay. Hearing none, Mr. Harris on the motion to amend.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Beke.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Gregg.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. Thank you, gentlemen. Excellent. Councilors, we now have an amended motion on the floor. Comments on the motion as amended? From the public on the motion as amended? Hearing none, Mr. Harris on the motion as amended.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Beke.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Gregg.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Okay, we go then to Administration Bill number 21, 2022. Mr. Harris, if you'd be so kind.
Yes, Mr. President. An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Lancaster prohibiting the use of consumer fireworks within the City of Lancaster, but providing for permits in certain cases.
Motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Councilor Diaz?
Just like Bernie said, the recent changes in the state law regarding consuming fireworks that allows municipalities to prohibit use of consuming fireworks. The bill would allow a small number of property owners to seek permits to use fireworks. Those owners will have properties in which fireworks could be used, and it would be about at least 150 feet from the building, or 300 feet if they have livestock or animals in their housing. The violations also for punishment would be by $500 fine, and thereafter sequential violations would be $1,000. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor Diaz. I believe we've discussed this a couple of times. Council comments from the public? Going once, going twice. Okay, great. Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Beke.
Aye.
Mr. Cleese.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye, thank you. We have dealt with Section D previously, so that brings us to the end of our legislative agenda and takes us to our second public comment period, open for comment about issues not previously addressed on the agenda. Please limit the duration of your comments to 3 minutes. Mr. Acosta-Velez, please proceed.
My name is Ivan Acosta-Velez. I live at the 800 block of Highland Avenue. I am still waiting for my roof to be fixed from the program, and I'm still waiting for my floor that $2,000 was spent, and it's still not corrected. So maybe someone will tell me who to call if you guys can't handle it. So it needs to be handled because it's money that you guys bid it on, and it's not being done. So $7,000 for a roof that's still leaking, and almost $21,000 for a man that's not in this area that worked on my house, and the floor is done wrong, the paint job is done wrong, and I invite you to come and I'll give you coffee Bustelo so you can try it and you can see it for yourself, because I'm not going nowhere. The only thing you can pray is that I die, but I'm going to keep on coming until it gets done, okay? And I'm not playing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Acosta-Velez. Are there any other public comments? Okay, hearing none, we go then to the report of the mayor, Mayor Sirachi.
Thank you. Just two quick items. In April of 2019, the City of Lancaster joined the boroughs of Carlisle and Columbia in filing a petition to the Commonwealth Court of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania challenging the validity of Section 5918 of the Pennsylvania Public Utilities Commission regulations, as amended, bear with me, by a final rulemaking order adopted on May 22nd, 2014, which mandated that gas meters be placed at outdoor locations while permitting the natural gas distribution companies to consider the placement of gas meters in indoor locations when a gas meter is in a building within a locally designated historic district. The city, along with the boroughs, alleged that Section 5918 illegally delegated the authority to allow indoor placement to the natural gas distribution companies. On October 11th, the Commonwealth Court entered an order granting the city's position and declaring the city's petition and declaring that Section 5918 of the Pennsylvania PUC Commission regulations, as amended by the final rulemaking order from May of 2014, constitutes an unconstitutional delegation of legislative authority and is unenforceable. The order supports the city's continued efforts to preserve the historic character of its neighborhoods and properties and the right to property owners to preserve the same. The Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission does have the right to appeal this decision to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the time frame for doing so has not yet expired. I will continue to keep council updated on the status of this this matter, and we spent a lot of time in the early years of UGI coming into the city in historic district and placing gas meters. And if you were on council during that time, it is almost impossible for you not to have been standing along somebody's sidewalk or in somebody's yard talking about the placement of gas meters, the distance between the gas meters and the edge of the curb, issues related to the width of sidewalks and ADA accessibility, and so on and so on. And so this was positive news for the city, and it's not over until it's over. The second thing I just want to briefly highlight is that it is Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, and the city is going to be hosting an open house this Thursday, October 27th, from 5:30 to 7 at Crispus Attics, and I hope you all will be able to join. This event will spotlight the city's Lead Safe Lancaster initiative to combat childhood lead poisoning, which includes the lead hazard control program and efforts of the city health and housing officials, and the new policy changes that have been enacted by council earlier this year that will go into effect in January of 2023. So I encourage you all to come. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mayor, what are the odds we are sending Barry to the Supreme Court of the United States?
Pardon me?
What are the odds we're sending Barry to the Supreme Court of the United States?
We're not sending Barry to the Supreme Court of the United States, but we do have other counsel.
Shame.
Yes.
I have
Maybe we'll make it a field trip, Council President.
That would be fun. I have no report. Council comments? Okay. With that, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Have a good evening. Thank you.
That's funny.